Michael Voss leaned on the polished silver railing, his eyes scanning the vast chamber ahead. The summit hall was a spectacle of unity, if only on the surface. Domed ceilings lined with holographic constellations, floating platforms for delegates from dozens of species, and a symphony of alien voices murmuring in countless tongues. Michael couldn't help but feel like the odd man out. Humans had joined the interstellar scene only a few decades ago, and though their rapid adaptation was impressive, they were still the newcomers. "I feel like we're on the first day of school," Michael muttered, adjusting the stiff collar of his formal uniform. Beside him, Alec Tran gave a quiet chuckle. "Yeah, but it's one hell of a school, huh? I mean, look at them." Alec, his younger aide, was sharp, quick-witted, and annoyingly good at making light of serious situations. The two of them had been thrown together at the last minute for this mission. Michael was the career officer, seasoned, calm under pressure. Alec was the tech-savvy diplomat in training, always ready with a quip or a clever observation. Michael followed Alec's gaze to a group of Ketrans across the hall. The tall, scaled beings moved with practiced precision, their angular features partially hidden by ceremonial cloaks. Leading them was Zaria, the Ketran delegate. Michael had studied her profile beforehand, commander of several peacekeeping missions, renowned tactician, and a figure of respect among her people. She wasn't just another face in the crowd. "Imposing, aren't they?" Michael said. Alec nodded. "And not much for small talk, I hear." The chamber buzzed as delegates took their places, and a chime signaled the start of the summit. Michael and Alec straightened up, stepping onto their designated platform. The human delegation's position was near the center, a calculated move designed to showcase humanity's rising presence. Michael could feel the eyes on them. Some were curious, others skeptical, a few openly dismissive. He was used to that. As the Ketran delegation approached, Michael prepared to deliver the greeting he'd been practicing for days. The Ketran salute was intricate, involving a series of hand gestures and a slight bow. He'd rehearsed it tirelessly, but now, under the scrutiny of alien dignitaries, his confidence wavered. "Don't overthink it," Alec whispered. "Just do it like you practiced." "Easy for you to say," Michael replied, stepping forward to meet Zaria. She was even more intimidating up close. Her amber eyes glinted under the chamber's soft light, and the intricate scales on her hands caught the eye as she raised them in the traditional Ketran gesture. Michael mirrored her movement, then hesitated. He second-guessed the placement of his fingers, the angle of his bow. Was it supposed to be the left hand first or the right? In the split second of hesitation, he panicked. Instead of completing the salute, he extended his hand in a classic human handshake. A gesture entirely alien to the Ketrans. The room went silent. A few Ketran delegates exchanged glances. Zaria's expression remained composed, but her slight tilt of the head indicated she noticed the blunder. Michael quickly withdrew his hand and attempted the correct salute, but the damage was done. "Well," Alec whispered as they stepped back. "That could have gone worse." Michael shot him a look but said nothing. The rest of the opening ceremony proceeded smoothly enough, though he couldn't shake the feeling that his mistake was the only thing anyone would remember. Once the formalities ended, the delegates dispersed into smaller groups for discussions and negotiations. Michael and Alec found themselves near one of the floating observation platforms overlooking the station's sprawling docking bay. "I didn't think it'd be that hard," Michael admitted, running a hand through his hair. "I must have practiced that salute 100 times. "It's just nerves," Alec said. "They'll forget about it by tomorrow." "I'm not so sure." Zaria didn't look amused. Alec smirked. "Maybe she's just hard to read. You're overanalyzing. You'll get another chance to fix it." Michael sighed, turning to face the vast starfield visible through the transparent walls. "I hope so." "Commander Voss." A clear, measured voice behind him broke the conversation. Michael turned to find Zaria standing a few meters away, her posture straight and formal. Alec quickly stepped aside, giving them space. "Commander Zaria," Michael said, offering a respectful nod. I wanted to apologize." "You do not need to apologize," she interrupted, her voice calm. "It is clear you are unfamiliar with our traditions. The stakes are natural in such situations." Her words were measured, neither harsh nor forgiving. Michael felt both relief and unease. "I appreciate that. I meant no disrespect." She nodded once, her amber gaze steady. "Then we can move forward. However, I would suggest that you take the time to learn more about our customs before our next interaction. I would be willing to instruct you personally if you wish." Michael blinked. "You would?" "Yes. Your intentions seem genuine, and understanding each other's cultures is essential to our shared goals." Michael glanced at Alec, who gave a subtle thumbs up from a distance. Turning back to Zaria, he offered a more confident nod. "I'd be honored, Commander." "Thank you." She inclined her head slightly. Very well. Meet me tomorrow at midday in the Cultural Exchange Chamber. We will begin then. Without waiting for a response, she turned and walked away, her cloak swaying behind her. Michael stood there for a moment, processing the unexpected offer. Alex sidled up to him, grinning. See? You're already making friends. Friends might be a stretch, Michael said. But it's a start. Hey, if she's willing to help, you might as well take advantage. Who knows? Maybe you'll learn enough to impress everyone at the next summit. Michael chuckled. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. I just want to make it through the next meeting without embarrassing humanity again. Alec clapped him on the shoulder. You'll be fine. Just remember, no handshakes. The two of them shared a laugh before heading off to prepare for the next day. For Michael, the path forward was uncertain, but he knew one thing for sure: he wasn't about to give up after one mistake. There was too much at stake, and besides, he had a lot more to learn about the galaxy and the beings who called it home. The Cultural Exchange Chamber was not what Michael had expected. Instead of the sterile, high-tech briefing room he'd imagined, it was more like a sprawling library. Shelves of shimmering data crystals lined the walls, interspersed with holographic displays that projected moving images and symbols. The air carried a faint, metallic tang, as if the room itself thrummed with the weight of knowledge from dozens of civilizations. Michael stood in the middle of the room, feeling a bit like a student called to the principal's office. Alec had accompanied him as usual and was now staring at a floating diagram of a Ketran starship with what could only be described as professional curiosity. You know, I've always wondered how their propulsion systems work, Alec said, waving his hand through the diagram. Looks like they're using some kind of field harmonics instead of traditional thrust. Focus, Alec, Michael said, a touch more sharply than intended. Relax, I'm focused, Alec replied with a grin. You're the one who's supposed to be meeting with the commander, not me. Michael was about to respond when the door on the far side of the chamber hissed open. Zarya entered, her movement as fluid as ever, but now her cloak was gone, revealing a formal tunic made of some intricate, scale-like material that shimmered in the light. She carried a small, metallic device that resembled a slim tablet. Commander Voss, she said, inclining her head in greeting. And your companion. I take it he is your advisor. Advisor might be generous, Michael said, shooting Alec a glance. This is Alec Tran. He's part of my team. Alec stepped forward and extended a hand. Pleasure to meet you. Zarya looked at the hand, then back at Alec, before performing a subtle Ketran bow. It is customary for Ketrans to bow, not grasp hands. Alec withdrew his hand sheepishly. Noted. I'll follow your lead next time. Zarya turned her attention back to Michael. We will begin with a basic understanding of gestures and their significance in Ketran society. It is not just about the movements themselves but the intent behind them. For example, she raised her hand, fingers spread in an arc, and bowed her head slightly. This is a greeting of respect, appropriate for formal introductions. Michael mimicked the gesture, trying to match the angle of her fingers. Like this. She stepped closer, her amber eyes narrowing slightly as she studied his form. Not quite. Your fingers must curve more. Like this. She demonstrated again, and Michael adjusted his hand. Zarya nodded once. Better. Practice this several times each day, and it will become natural. Got it, Michael said. I'll make sure to practice. Alec coughed lightly. Maybe I should practice too, just in case. Zarya regarded Alec for a moment. Very well. It would be beneficial for both of you to understand our customs. Ketrans value precision and intent. A careless movement can be interpreted as indifference or disrespect. Sounds like I need to work on my finesse, Alec quipped. Can't have the Ketrans thinking I'm just some bumbling human. Michael rolled his eyes. Maybe if you spent less time making jokes and more time paying attention. Hey, humor's an important cultural bridge, Alec replied. You know, universal language and all that. Zarya raised an eyebrow. Humor is not universal. Ketrans do not often indulge in humor for its own sake. However, we do appreciate cleverness. If your humor conveys intelligence, it may be more acceptable. Alec looked genuinely interested. So, you're saying it's all about delivery? Like, if I tell a joke that's actually insightful, it could work. Zarya's expression didn't shift. Perhaps. But the line between cleverness and mockery is thin. Tread carefully. Michael couldn't help but smile. I think she's saying your jokes need work, Alec. Noted, Alec said. I'll stick to insightful commentary. Mostly. Zarya turned back to Michael. Now, let us discuss the use of color in formal attire. Ketrans communicate status and intention through subtle variations in hue and pattern. For instance, she gestured to the shimmering scales of her tunic. This pattern indicates my role as a diplomat and a warrior. The shades of bronze represent leadership while the blue-green undertones suggest a willingness to engage in discourse rather than combat. Alec leaned in, studying the fabric with interest. That's fascinating. I mean, in human fashion, colors can signify a lot too, but we don't have it standardized like that. It's more like trends. Trends? Zaria repeated, her tone neutral. Yeah, like, what's popular changes all the time, Alec explained. One year, everyone's wearing bright yellow, and the next it's all black and white patterns. It's more about what's in style than any fixed meaning. Zaria seemed to consider this a fluid system. I see. In Ketran culture, certain patterns and colors have held their significance for centuries. Stability and meaning is part of our tradition. I guess it says a lot about how humans and Ketrans approach change, Michael said. We tend to adapt quickly, sometimes at the cost of consistency. While Ketrans value consistency, sometimes at the cost of swift adaptation, Zaria replied. It is a difference worth noting. Alec smiled. And here I thought it was just about who wore it better. The faintest hint of amusement flickered across Zaria's face, though she quickly resumed her usual composed demeanor. Humor, if used sparingly, can indeed lighten tension. See, I'm learning already, Alec said with a grin. Don't let it go to your head, Michael said, shaking his head. We're here to learn, not crack jokes. Zaria nodded approvingly. You are correct, Commander. There is much to learn if we are to strengthen our understanding. Shall we continue? For the next hour, they practiced various gestures, discussed ceremonial protocols, and compared cultural values. Alec, despite his playful attitude, absorbed the information quickly, offering occasional observations that even Zaria seemed to find insightful. Michael focused on mastering the Ketran salute, determined not to repeat his earlier mistake. As the session wound down, Zaria paused, studying Michael. You learn quickly, Commander Voss. And you demonstrate a willingness to adapt, which is essential for meaningful dialogue between our species. Thank you, Commander Zaria, Michael said. I'm committed to making this work. I know I have a lot to learn, but I'll keep at it. You have made progress today, Zaria said. Tomorrow, we will focus on more nuanced forms of communication, tone, posture, and the subtleties of intent. Looking forward to it, Michael said, and he meant it. As they left the chamber, Alec leaned closer to Michael. You know, she's not as intimidating once you get to know her. I think it's more that you're starting to understand her, Michael replied. It's a process. Well, I like this process, Alec said. I mean, when else are we gonna get a crash course in Ketran culture from someone who actually knows what she's talking about? Michael chuckled. Just don't overdo it. The last thing I need is you making another joke that doesn't land. Hey, I'm refining my approach, Alec said with a wink. Cleverness only, I promise. As they walked down the corridor, Michael felt a bit more confident about the days to come. They had a long way to go, but for the first time since arriving at the summit, it felt like they were starting to understand the path forward. Michael and Alec found themselves in a quieter corner of the summit's sprawling station, seated in a small observation lounge that offered a sweeping view of the stars. After several days of cultural exchanges and negotiations, the human delegation had earned some downtime. Alec, ever the opportunist, was tinkering with a portable scanner he'd picked up from a vendor, muttering to himself about frequency calibrations. I don't see why you couldn't wait until we got back to the lab, Michael said, leaning back in his seat and watching the stars drift by. Because then it wouldn't be a challenge, Alec replied without looking up. Besides, I'm just checking if it's as advanced as the vendor claimed. Michael rolled his eyes. Just don't break it. I'm not gonna break it. The door to the lounge slid open, and Zaria stepped in, her scaled tunic catching the dim light. Michael immediately straightened, unsure whether to rise or stay seated. Alec glanced up, momentarily startled, before casually setting the scanner aside. Commander Zaria, Michael said, nodding politely. Zaria approached, her posture as composed as ever. Commander Voss. I am not disturbing you, am I? Not at all. We were just taking a break, Michael replied. What can we do for you? Zaria tilted her head slightly, a gesture Michael had learned was a sign of consideration. I have been reflecting on our discussions. While you have made progress, there is one element of Ketran culture that cannot be conveyed solely through instruction. Alec raised an eyebrow. What's that? Zaria shifted her gaze to him, her amber eyes steady. Practical experience. Commander Voss, you have learned the proper gestures and the meaning of certain rituals, but have you yet participated in one? Michael hesitated. You mean an actual Ketran ceremony? Yes, she said, her tone calm but firm. We are hosting a small gathering in the Cultural Exchange Chamber this evening. It will be a simple event, not an official summit activity, but it will provide you the opportunity to practice what you have learned in a real setting. Alec looked to Michael, a hint of a smile on his face. Sounds like a good chance to show off those salute skills. Michael ignored Alec's comment. I appreciate the offer, Commander. I'll be there. Zarya inclined her head. I will send you the details. Until then, be prepared to follow my lead. With that, she turned and left, leaving Michael and Alec alone once more. Follow her lead, Alec said after a moment, mimicking Zarya's measured tone. Sounds like this is gonna be fun. It's a chance to make a good impression, Michael said. Besides, how hard can it be? By the time evening arrived, Michael had second thoughts about his earlier confidence. The cultural exchange chamber was arranged differently from the last time he'd been there. Several tables were set up with intricate displays of Ketran artifacts, holographic projections of their history and art, and samples of their food and drink. The room was dimly lit, giving it a ceremonial atmosphere. Michael and Alec arrived early, and Zarya greeted them at the entrance. She was dressed in an even more elaborate tunic, its patterns and colors more intricate than before. Good evening, Zarya said, her tone formal. I trust you are ready to observe and participate? Michael nodded. We're ready. Alec, less formal, added, can't wait to see what you've got planned. Zarya led them inside, explaining that the gathering was a bonding ritual meant to strengthen ties among individuals who had recently met. While it wasn't as formal as a diplomatic meeting, it still carried weight in Ketran culture. We will begin with the traditional greeting, Zarya said, demonstrating the familiar hand gesture. As the host, I will initiate. You need only mirror my movements. Michael watched her carefully and mirrored the gesture without hesitation. Alec followed suit, though his timing was slightly off. Not bad, Zarya said, a hint of approval in her voice. As more Ketrans arrived, Michael noticed how they moved through the room, exchanging gestures and small tokens, colored stones, patterned cloth strips, and other small items that seemed to hold symbolic meaning. Zarya explained that these items represented traits or intentions and that giving one to another person was a sign of respect or goodwill. Alec picked up a small cloth strip with a swirling blue pattern. So, what's this one mean? Zarya glanced at it. That indicates trustworthiness. If you were to offer it to someone, it would suggest that you find them reliable and dependable. Alec handed it to Michael with a grin. There you go, boss. You can trust me. Michael smirked. Not sure if I'm supposed to accept it. Zarya tilted her head. Accepting it would indicate you agree with the sentiment. Michael took the strip, then handed it back to Alec. Sure. I trust you. The room filled with a low hum of conversation as the gathering progressed. Michael noticed that Zarya had started to engage with others, exchanging gestures and tokens with an ease that suggested she had done this countless times. Alec, meanwhile, continued to explore the displays, occasionally asking Zarya questions that she answered with patience. Eventually, Zarya returned to Michael. You are adapting well, Commander. Your movements are more fluid now. Thanks, he said. I've had good instruction. Her gaze lingered on him for a moment longer before she reached into a small pouch at her side. She pulled, Oh. You're giving this to me? Yes, Zarya said simply. You have shown effort and sincerity in your learning. It is appropriate. He accepted the stone, holding it carefully. Thank you, Commander. I'll do my best to live up to it. Zarya inclined her head. You already are. Alec, watching from nearby, whispered, Hey, I think you're making friends. Michael shot him a look but didn't respond. Instead, he returned his attention to Zarya. What happens next? Now, you may offer a token in return, she said. It does not need to be an item from this table. A gesture or a few words of genuine intent will suffice. Michael thought for a moment, then said, in human culture, a handshake often symbolizes trust and agreement. Since that's not appropriate here, I'll offer this instead. He performed the Ketran gesture she'd taught him, carefully matching her earlier movements. This is my way of saying I respect your traditions and am grateful for the chance to learn from you. Zarya's expression softened slightly. A thoughtful gesture. Thank you, Commander. As the gathering continued, Michael felt a shift in the atmosphere. What had started as a formal exercise was becoming more natural. The Ketrans were not as distant as they first seemed, and Michael realized that the ritual wasn't just about learning rules, it was about understanding their values and finding common ground. By the end of the evening, Michael and Alec walked back to their quarters feeling more confident about their place in the summit. Michael carried the golden stone in his pocket, a small reminder of the progress they'd made. For the first time, he felt like they were no longer outsiders but part of something larger. It was early morning on the orbital station and the usual hum of activity had yet to fully pick up. Michael stood in the gallery overlooking the shipyards, nursing a mug of coffee that had been brewed by a machine far too advanced to belong on Earth. Alec, leaning against the railing next to him, had already finished his first cup and was enthusiastically explaining the finer points of a Ketron hover transport he'd seen the previous night. And it's not just the repulsor field density, Alec was saying, gesturing animatedly. It's how they layer it. They figured out that if you shift the amplitude by just a fraction of it. Alec, Michael interrupted. Do you ever take a break? I am on a break, Alec replied with a grin. But I can't just ignore how brilliant their engineering is. It's like every problem we think is unsolvable, they've already solved twice over. Michael smirked. I think you just like having new toys to look at. Before Alec could respond, the doors behind them slid open and Zaria walked in. As usual, her movements were deliberate and calm, and her scaled tunic shimmered faintly under the gallery's lighting. She carried a small datapad which she tucked under her arm as she approached. Good morning, Commander Voss, Alec Tran, she said with a slight inclination of her head. Good morning, Commander Zaria, Michael replied, setting his coffee down on the railing. You're up early. I prefer to review reports before the day's discussions begin, she said simply. Her amber eyes flicked to Alec, who looked like he was about to launch into another engineering monologue. And you, Alec? Are you enjoying the station's facilities? Alec grinned. Absolutely. The technology here is incredible. I could spend weeks just studying how your docking systems operate. Zaria raised an eyebrow, her tone neutral. A worthwhile pursuit. Efficiency in docking procedures is critical for maintaining order in a station of this size. Exactly. Alec said, clearly pleased to have her agreement. And the modular repair platforms you use, they're genius. We have nothing like that back home. Perhaps one day Earth will develop similar capabilities, Zaria said. Her gaze shifted back to Michael. But I did not come here to discuss engineering. Commander Voss, I have a proposal for the next stage of your cultural training. Michael straightened. What kind of proposal? I believe you are ready to experience a traditional Ketron bonding exercise, Zaria said. It is a physical and mental activity that emphasizes trust, cooperation, and understanding. We use it to strengthen connections between individuals, especially those who must work closely together. Michael glanced at Alec, who looked both intrigued and cautious. What does this exercise involve? It is conducted in a simulated environment, Zaria explained. Participants must navigate a series of challenges, some physical, some strategic, relying on each other's strengths. By the end, it is expected that you will have a deeper understanding of your partner's capabilities and how best to support them. Alec raised a hand. So, like team-building exercises? Zaria tilted her head slightly. I am not familiar with that term. It's something we do back on Earth, activities designed to improve teamwork and communication, Alec said. You know, rope courses, problem-solving games, that sort of thing. Zaria nodded once. A similar concept, though our approach may differ. Michael considered it. Sounds like a good opportunity. When do we start? Tomorrow morning, Zaria said. I will provide you with the details and location. It is not mandatory, but I believe you will find it beneficial. We're in, Michael said firmly, and Alec nodded in agreement. Very well, Zaria said. I will see you then. She turned and left, leaving the two men alone once more. Team building with a Ketron warrior, Alec said, leaning on the railing again. Should be interesting. Understatement of the year, Michael replied. Let's just hope we don't embarrass ourselves. The next morning, Michael and Alec arrived at the simulation chamber where Zaria was waiting along with another Ketron attendant who oversaw the exercise. The chamber was equipped with modular walls, holographic projectors, and what appeared to be a series of automated drones. Welcome, Zaria said. This simulation will test your ability to adapt, communicate, and support one another. You will be paired together against the environment. The challenges are not designed to be impossible, but they will require you to think creatively and work as a unit. Michael nodded. Understood. Alec gave a thumbs up. Sounds like fun. The exercise began with a simple navigation challenge. Michael and Alec had to guide themselves through a maze-like structure that shifted and rearranged itself. Zaria observed from a control console, occasionally offering guidance but otherwise letting them figure things out on their own. Okay, we need to keep track of these changes, Michael said as one of the walls slid into place behind them. Alec, can you mark the corners with those beacons? Got it, Alec replied, attaching small devices that emitted faint lights. This way we'll know if we're doubling back. After a few minutes of trial and error, they emerged from the maze into a larger chamber where small drones hovered at different heights. A voice over the intercom, the Ketron attendant explained that their next task was to disable the drones in a specific order without triggering any alarms. Alec whistled. This is more my speed. I'll handle the drones, you keep an eye on the patterns. On it, Michael said, watching the drone's movements carefully. Start with the one on the left. It's on the shortest path. Alec moved swiftly, deactivating the drones one by one while Michael called out instructions. They encountered a few close calls. One drone nearly triggered an alarm when Alec's hand slipped, but they managed to complete the task without setting off any alerts. Nice work, Michael said as they moved on to the next area. That could have gone sideways fast. Hey, I had it under control, Alec said, though his grin betrayed his relief. But yeah, not bad teamwork. The final stage of the exercise was more physically demanding. They had to navigate a series of raised platforms, some of which collapsed under weight, while carrying a heavy container that simulated valuable cargo. Zarya observed from above, watching how they coordinated their movements. This thing weighs a ton, Alec grunted, holding one end of the container. You sure we can't just push it? No shortcuts, Michael said. If we drop it, we fail the test. Alec sighed. Fine. But next time, we're bringing a dolly. They carefully worked their way across the platforms, calling out to each other whenever a section seemed unstable. At one point, Alec almost lost his footing, but Michael steadied him in time. Thanks, Alec said, catching his breath. Didn't think I'd need a spotter for this. That's why it's called a team exercise, Michael said, giving him a pat on the back. We've got this. Just a few more platforms. They reached the end of the course and set the container down. The holographic environment faded and Zarya approached, her expression neutral but her tone approving. You have completed the exercise successfully, she said. Your coordination and communication improved as you progressed. Well done. Thanks, Michael said, wiping the sweat from his brow. It was a good challenge. Alec grinned. So, what do we win? Respect, Zarya said simply. And a better understanding of how to work together. Fair enough, Alec said. Zarya turned to Michael. You demonstrated adaptability and a willingness to support each other. This is the foundation of any strong partnership. Michael nodded. I'll remember that. As they left the simulation chamber, Alec said, I think I'm finally starting to get how Ketrans approach things. It's all about precision and trust. That's what this whole summit is about, Michael said. Learning to understand each other. Well, Alec said, I'd say we're off to a pretty good start. Michael couldn't help but agree. Michael and Alec found themselves seated at a corner table in one of the station's quieter dining areas. The room had a subdued glow, with curved walls displaying gentle projections of distant nebulae. A few other alien delegates were scattered across the space, but it was calm enough for an uninterrupted conversation. Michael stirred his drink, a mildly tangy beverage he had yet to identify, while Alec poked at a plate of what he assumed was some kind of pasta. This stuff isn't bad, Alec said, nudging a forkful toward Michael. Tastes like a cross between gnocchi and, well, something I can't quite place. Michael waved it off. I'll take your word for it. Alec shrugged and took another bite. You've got to try new things, Commander. Isn't that why we're out here? Trying new things doesn't mean I have to eat something I can't identify, Michael said, smirking. I'm here to learn, not gamble on alien cuisine. Alec chuckled. Fair enough. So, what's next on our grand agenda? Another Ketran bonding exercise? Maybe a trust fall from orbit. Very funny, Michael said. We're meeting Zarya later. She wants to go over some finer points of Ketran negotiation styles. Apparently, I need to refine my approach. Let me guess, Alec said. It's all about precision again. Every word, every gesture, every look has to mean something. Pretty much, Michael replied. And given my track record, I need all the help I can get. Don't sell yourself short, Alec said. You've been doing fine so far. Sure, you had a rough start, but you've come a long way. Michael shook his head. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. I'm still figuring this out as I go. Well, if you ask me, you're doing better than half the other humans who've tried this before. I mean, I read some reports and let's just say it wasn't always smooth sailing for our delegation in the past. Thanks for the vote of confidence, Michael said. I'll take that as encouragement. Alec leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. You know, the Ketrans aren't so bad once you get to know them. I mean, they're intense, sure, but they've got a lot of depth. Michael nodded. That's what I'm realizing. Zarya especially. She's not what I expected. Right? She's got this whole stoic warrior vibe, but then she'll hit you with something that makes you think she's been reading Earth philosophy on her off days. Michael laughed lightly. She does have a way of putting things into perspective. It's humbling, honestly. Makes me realize how much I still have to learn. Alec glanced around the room, then leaned in slightly. Speaking of Zarya, do you think Alec, Michael interrupted, cutting him off. Let's not start that conversation. What? I'm just saying. Let it go, Michael said firmly. Alec held up his hands in mock surrender. All right. No need to get all tense. Michael sighed. I'm not tense. I just think it's best to keep things professional. Sure, Alex said, a hint of mischief in his tone. Professional. They fell into a comfortable silence after that, each lost in their own thoughts. Michael's mind drifted to the conversations he'd had with Zaria over the past few days. There was something about her that went beyond the usual diplomatic interactions he'd had with other species. She had a quiet intensity, a depth that made him feel as though she saw more than what he showed on the surface. A chime from his communicator pulled him out of his thoughts. He glanced at the screen and saw Zaria's name. It's her, Michael said, standing. Looks like our meeting's happening sooner than I thought. Good luck, Commander, Alex said, giving him a thumbs up. I'll hold down the fort here. Michael left the dining area and headed toward one of the station's smaller conference rooms. When he arrived, Zaria was already there, standing near a holographic display of trade routes and regional borders. She turned as he entered, her expression as composed as ever. Commander Voss, she said, greeting him with the customary Ketran gesture. Thank you for meeting me on short notice. Not a problem, Michael said, returning the gesture. What's on the agenda? Zaria gestured toward the holographic display. We will be discussing the subtleties of Ketran negotiation strategies. While you have grasped the basics, there are nuances that may not be immediately apparent. Michael stepped closer to the display. I'm listening. For example, Zaria began, Ketrans place great value on the concept of balance. When presenting terms, it is not enough to simply offer what one side desires. Both parties must perceive that they are receiving equal consideration. That makes sense, Michael said. If one side feels shortchanged, the deal won't hold. Correct, Zaria said. But achieving that balance is not always straightforward. It requires careful observation, the ability to read subtle cues, and the willingness to adjust one's position when necessary. Michael nodded, taking mental notes. So, it's less about hard bargaining and more about finding common ground. Precisely, Zaria said. Ketrans do not view negotiation as a competition to be won. It is a collaboration and opportunity to create something beneficial for all parties involved. That's a refreshing approach, Michael said. Back on Earth, negotiations often feel like a battle. Each side pushes until someone gives in. Such an approach can lead to short-term gains, Zaria said, but it rarely fosters lasting relationships. Ketrans value the long-term connection more than the immediate outcome. Michael considered her words. That's something I'll need to work on. In my past negotiations, I've been more focused on results than on building relationships. Then you have already taken the first step, Zaria said. Recognizing the need for change is the foundation for growth. Michael smiled slightly. You have a way of making it sound straightforward. It is not, Zaria said, her tone lightening. But you have shown the willingness to adapt. That is commendable. Michael glanced at the display again. What about nonverbal cues? I've noticed that your people rely heavily on body language. Zaria nodded. Indeed. A slight shift in posture, the angle of one's gaze, even the placement of one's hands all convey meaning. To an observer who is not familiar with these cues, they may go unnoticed. But for those who understand, they are as clear as spoken words. Can you give me an example? Michael asked. Zaria stepped closer to the display and adjusted her stance. When a Ketran negotiator stands with their feet shoulder-width apart and their hands clasped loosely in front, it indicates a position of openness. They are willing to hear the other side's perspective. Michael mimicked her stance. Like this. Close, Zaria said. She adjusted his posture slightly. Your hands should be relaxed, not tense. It conveys trust. Michael made the adjustment. Got it. Zaria took a step back and studied him. You are a fast learner, Commander. With continued practice, these gestures will become second nature. I hope so, Michael said. I'd hate to accidentally insult someone by standing the wrong way. You will not, Zaria said confidently. You are more observant than you realize. For a moment, there was a quiet between them. Michael met Zaria's gaze, and for the first time, he thought he saw something beyond her calm exterior. It was fleeting, but it felt significant. Well, he said, breaking the silence. I'll keep practicing. And thank you for taking the time to teach me. It is my duty as a representative of my people, Zaria said. And it has been a worthwhile endeavor. Michael nodded, feeling the weight of her words. I'll see you at the next session then. I look forward to it, Zaria said. As Michael left the conference room, he couldn't help but think that Zaria wasn't just a teacher or a colleague. There was something more developing between them, something that went beyond mere diplomacy. He wasn't sure where it would lead, but he knew he wanted to find out.